I know your readers don't normally do this, but I wanted to give some thoughts on this chapter that I just read. First Nephi chapter 16 is mostly a narrative, but there are a couple of points in it that I wanted to hit on, specifically in verse 18. How does a steel bow break? It seems to many people that steel is not something that breaks, but let's keep in mind that metallurgy back then is not what it was now, although it was fairly advanced at the time. I had an institute teacher who pointed out that steel gets brittle when in the presence of salt water. So if Nephi's bow was made of steel and got brittle enough to break, they were getting closer to the ocean. Now this is an interesting point. We know that they were traveling towards the ocean, and so it's completely feasible that Nephi's bow would have broken and gotten brittle as they got closer to the ocean. But would Joseph Smith have known that if he was writing this book himself? Or is that another proof that the Book of Mormon is true? A scientific fact that Joseph Smith wouldn't have known when he wrote the Book of Mormon, that obviously came from the translation of the Book of Mormon. Nephi says a lot, and it came to pass, to the point where my 5-year-old son now, when we read the Book of Mormon, assumes that every verse starts with, and it came to pass. It's believed that that was a grammatical translation of a new paragraph. And so every time you see, and it came to pass, it was essentially Nephi starting a new thought, a new paragraph. And you see that a lot in the early chapters of the Book of Mormon, but you don't see it so much later, where the grammar changes when a new writer enters. Something interesting. We also see in verses 37 and 38 the sophistry that Laman begins to teach and that continues to be taught to his children. The Lamanites, who his children descend from, believe exactly what's written here in verses 37 and 38, that the Nephites, or Nephi in particular, had the intent to rule over them by leading them out through lies and sophistry. So the seeds that created the Lamanite nation and gave them the beliefs that they were planted early in the Book of Mormon, early in the story of Laman and Lemuel, or early in the story of the Book of Mormon, by Laman and Lemuel. I don't think we should underestimate his cleverness in coming up with something like this that lasted so many generations. It's also a point about the long-lastingness of our thoughts on our children and our children's children and their children. In fact, I believe it took something akin to 500 years before they finally got over that thinking, or were teachable enough that they could accept the gospel. Long-lasting effects from a single parent to his children. That's my thoughts on chapter 16. Thank you very much.